could take some pictures, but before I gotta go, this is my last stop on this tour, so I'm not gonna say best for last, but you are the last. So we started, I came over with General Milley on this trip, and we went to Afghanistan on Tuesday. We got there on Tuesday afternoon. We did some stuff there that night, and then we went to Jalalabad and did some things on Wednesday, and then flew here Wednesday, which was yesterday, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Man.
I don't even know.
Yeah, yesterday, and then today, lots of running around today, and then we're heading back. I get to go home, and you're staying, and I just wanted to. Sorry to remind you about that. Didn't mean to put it that way, but I've been at this for quite a while. Made my first trips here to Iraq in 2003. A couple of trips that year, and then back in 07, 08. Haven't been here since then. Other places in between. Have a foundation that I started that is very focused on our military and veteran support, and we work with our wounded and Gold Star families, lots of things, lots of initiatives and programs at the foundation. If you go to GarySiniseFoundation.org, you can learn a little bit more about what we're doing. I have veterans in my family. That's kind of where it starts with me, all this military support. Grandfather served in World War I. How many had a grandfather in World War I? Anybody? Right, okay, so that's 100 years ago. 100 years ago. My grandfather was 17, went in at 17, was in France when he was 18 years old during the Battle of the Argonne. Then he had 3 sons. My dad served in the Navy during Korea, and my dad's 2 older brothers were World War II veterans. One was on a ship in the Pacific during the invasions of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. And then my uncle Jack, the older of the 2, he was a navigator on a B-17 bomber over Europe, 30 missions over Europe. And then on my wife's side of the family, Vietnam veterans. Her two brothers served in Vietnam. One was a combat assault helicopter pilot in Vietnam, and the other was a West Point graduate. Went over once, the first tour as a platoon leader, lieutenant, then he went back as a captain and company commander, then came home and taught at West Point. In fact, he was a TAC officer for some of our 4-star generals right now that were young guys then. And then he went on to teach at Fort Leavenworth as a lieutenant colonel. He unfortunately was diagnosed with cancer in 1983, and he passed away. But I learned a lot from the veterans in my family, and they made a big impression on me as a young guy. Especially, in some ways, the Vietnam veterans more than the veterans in my own family. And back in the 70s and 80s, I started supporting local Vietnam veterans groups, trying to support them. And then in the 90s, I got to play a Vietnam veteran. And so, is there anyone who hasn't seen Forrest Gump in here? Everyone's seen it? Forrest Gump. Okay, well that was an important movie. It was not the first movie that I'd done, but I'd made a couple. I made Mice and Men, the Steinbeck novel, into a movie. And I think the director of Forrest Gump saw that movie and invited me to come in and audition for Lieutenant Dan, and I did that. So it was not the first movie I did, but it was an important movie because it was a widely seen film, big hit. A lot of people liked it. But more importantly, I got to play Lieutenant Dan, which was having Vietnam veterans in my family and having spent time supporting them back in the 80s, to get to play a Vietnam veteran in the 90s, and a Vietnam veteran who was wounded. That was kind of a life-changing experience in more ways than one. It was certainly life-changing on the career side, because nobody knew who I was before that. And obscurity was fun. And then, but that movie was seen by so many people that it changed the career. But it also, in 1994, when the movie came out, I was invited to come to the DAV convention, the Disabled American Veterans Convention. And do you know the DAV? Do you know what it is? Okay, it's the oldest advocacy group for wounded veterans that there is in the country. It's 95 years old. I didn't know anything about the DAV before I went to their convention, but I was very, very moved by that experience. There were 2,000 wounded veterans in the room when I walked in, and they all stood up and they were cheering, and they wanted to present me with an award for playing a wounded veteran in what they considered was a positive way. And the story, and I can see what they were getting at, because the story of Lieutenant Dan is a positive story when you look at it. It's a hopeful story for somebody who gets wounded, because in the end, what happens to Lieutenant Dan in the end? He's got new legs, right? And he's got a shrimp company and all that stuff. And he's wealthy, and he's doing okay, and he's moving on with his life. He's not, prior to, if you think about it, I don't know how many of you remember this, but Vietnam movies started being made about 3 years after the fall of Saigon. And I remember, and every time a movie about Vietnam came out, the Vietnam veteran in the movie you just weren't sure he was going to be okay at the end of the film. He was troubled from his experiences in war, from his experiences coming home from that war and what it was like. But Lieutenant Dan was different, because in the end, he's all right. He's moving on with his life. He's doing okay. He's wealthy. He's a businessman. He's standing up again. He cut his hair. He's married. All kinds of good things are happening to Lieutenant Dan, so it's a positive story. And, after we started deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan, we started having a new generation of Lieutenant Dans coming home from the war here and the war in Afghanistan, and I started visiting the hospitals. I realized that the story of Lieutenant Dan resonated with our wounded. When I would walk into those hospitals, they would not even know what my real name was. Lieutenant Dan, come on, hey, look at me, And they would be, wounded, laying in a hospital bed, and they'd want to talk about that character and what happened to him. And I realized he was going to travel with me, through my life. And I've got a band I even named after the character, Lieutenant Dan Band. Anybody seen the band before, anywhere? You had? Oh, great. So you had. Well, the band plays a lot of shows, and the whole thing about the band is it's part of my foundation, the Gary Sinise Foundation, as a program of my foundation, and I use the band to raise spirits, to raise awareness about what our military is going through, and to raise funds, to help the cause. So that character, resonated with me and has lived with me in a way that I could have never thought. I played other characters, other movies. Anybody see any of the other movies? Nobody's seen any of them. Really? Nobody's? Apollo 13? You didn't see that? Of Mice and Men? You said, somebody said they saw that. CSI New York. There you go. CSI New York was a slight homage to two people. My character, Mac, was the name of my character. That's my character's first name. Mac was my brother-in-law. who passed away, who was the West Point graduate. I named the character after him. And Taylor, his name was Mac Taylor. Taylor was Lieutenant Dan. Lieutenant Dan Taylor. It's a little trivia there. Okay, good. But it's been it's been a good career in CSI New York, by the way. Without that, I probably wouldn't have been able to do as much in the service work, because 9 years on TV it's good for the pocketbook, and I could use that. I could use that platform that I had on television and in movies to shine a spotlight on the people that are really important, and that's you, the people in this room, the people that serve our country, the people that sacrifice in freedom's defense. I found that all of a sudden my career had meaning beyond just my job. I could actually use the platform of being in the public eye and the financial rewards that brought to actually do something positive. So I encourage you to go to my foundation website and check out GarySiniseFoundation.org. Look at the YouTube channel. You'll see dozens of videos that show our programs for our wounded. We're building homes for badly wounded service members. I've been involved in over 60 houses for wounded folks over the years, building houses. It's good stuff. So I found that service at post-September 11th and the tragic things that happened there and all the stuff that's come in the last 15, 16 years, I needed to do. Many of you may have volunteered to go out and serve your country after that, or you're already in the service, or and you're still here, you're still fighting the fight, But I wanted to do something too, to help out. So if you're ever thinking that people don't know what you're doing, people back home, it's the holidays and you're over here, and people back home are going to the mall and doing all their things, going to the movies and Star Wars and everything like that. And if you're ever wondering whether people care and appreciate, just remember Gary Sinise came over here to see you, to say thank you for what you do for our country. Okay? Give yourself a hand, come on. We're going to do some pictures down here. God bless you, everybody, all right?